The desperate call. The stars shone brightly across the vast galaxy, silent and unmoving. In the deep void of space, no one could hear a scream. But today, something was different. A signal broke through the silence. It was faint at first, barely a whisper across the emptiness, but it grew louder and more urgent with every passing moment. On board the flagship of the Deathworlder fleet, Commander Voss stood at the observation window, his eyes scanning the endless black. His crew, the most fearsome warriors in the galaxy, moved around him, preparing their ships for the daily routines of space travel. Yet, something was wrong. The hair on the back of Voss's neck stood on end. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling. Then the alarm sounded. The ship's communications officer, a sharp-eyed alien known as Trix, turned to the commander. "Sir, we've intercepted a distress signal," she reported, her voice tense. "It's coming from a system far beyond our known routes." Voss's heart skipped a beat. It was rare to hear a distress signal in these parts of the galaxy, especially from alien species. The Deathworlder fleet had a reputation for being the strongest force in the galaxy, feared by many. But that didn't mean they helped anyone. They only fought for their own survival and interests. However, something about this signal seemed different. "What's the source?" Voss asked, his tone sharp. "It's coming from an uncharted planet, sir," Trix answered. "The coordinates, they're outside of our usual sector, near the edge of the galaxy." Voss crossed his arms, thinking hard. This could be a trap. There were many factions in the galaxy who hated the Deathworlders, and they might be trying to lure them into a deadly ambush. But then again, there was something strange in the message. It wasn't a military broadcast or a warning. It was a plea for help. "Play the message," Voss ordered. The room fell silent as the recording began. The voice that came through was weak, barely audible, but it was filled with panic. The alien voice was distorted, but the message was clear. "Help. We are under attack. We can't survive much longer. Please, assist us." The transmission cut off, leaving only the hum of the ship's engines filling the room. Commander Voss stared at the screen, processing what he had just heard. It wasn't a normal distress signal. It was a cry for help from beings who were desperate. "We need to respond," Voss said, his voice firm. "Prepare the fleet. We're going to investigate." The crew didn't hesitate. The Deathworlders were always ready for a fight. But this time, it wasn't just about combat. It was about saving those who couldn't save themselves. The fleet's ships, powerful and deadly, began to move into position. Voss's flagship, the Havoc, took the lead. The ship's dark hull shimmered in the starlight as it powered up, its weapons locked and ready. The rest of the fleet followed suit, a fearsome array of ships made to instill terror. But as they moved toward the unknown planet, Voss couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The closer they got to the planet, the more Voss's unease grew. The coordinates brought them to a system on the very edge of the galaxy, a place where few ships dared to venture. The planet they were heading to was small, surrounded by an asteroid belt that made it difficult to navigate. Even the most skilled pilots would find it dangerous to enter this system. "What do we know about the planet?" Voss asked, his gaze fixed on the display in front of him. Trix quickly pulled up the data. "The planet is habitable, but there's no sign of advanced technology. It's mostly uncharted, with only a few settlements here and there. The aliens on the planet are primitive." "Primitive," Voss repeated. "So why would they be in danger?" Trix hesitated. "There are no signs of any local threats. Nothing that could explain why they're asking for help." Voss frowned. "Interesting." The fleet moved closer to the planet, and the tension in the air grew thick. The planet below appeared peaceful from the distance, covered in green forests and blue oceans. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but Voss knew better than to trust appearances. In his experience, the calm before the storm was always the most dangerous time. "Commander, we're getting strange readings from the planet's surface," said one of the crew members. "Strange," Voss's voice grew colder. Energy surges. The crew member replied. They're coming from the planet. Unusual patterns. They don't match anything we've encountered before. Voss felt a shiver run down his spine. The message had been one of desperation, but now there was something more, something he couldn't explain. Prepare for landing, he ordered. We're going in, but stay alert. This could be a trap. As the fleet descended into the planet's atmosphere, the air was thick with tension. The ships moved like shadows, silent and deadly. The landscape below came into sharper focus as they neared the surface. The cities that dotted the planet's surface were in ruins. Fires burned in the distance, and the sky was filled with smoke. The Deathworlders were about to enter a war zone, and Voss knew they would face more than just hostile aliens. Something far darker and more dangerous was waiting for them on the surface. The fleet's landing craft touched down with a heavy thud. Voss's heart pounded in his chest as the hatch opened. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood and metal. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Voss tightened his grip on his weapon. The real fight was about to begin. The hidden enemy. The Deathworlder fleet's landing craft touched down with a resounding thud, shaking the ground beneath Voss's feet. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of the alien survivors who had sent the desperate distress call. The air was thick with smoke, and the sky above was dark, shrouded by thick clouds of ash. The once beautiful landscape now looked like a war-torn wasteland. Stay sharp, everyone, Voss commanded, his voice low and commanding. His hand rested on the hilt of his weapon as he stepped off the craft, his boots crunching against the cracked earth. Behind him, the rest of the Deathworlder soldiers followed, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. Trix, the communications officer, was the first to speak up. Commander, I'm detecting faint energy signals on the other side of the ruined city. It's too weak to get a clear reading, but it's definitely coming from there. Voss nodded. We move out, stick together, and watch your backs. If this is a trap, we'll be ready. The team moved through the ruins of the city. Tall, once proud buildings now lay in rubble, shattered windows, and collapsed structures serving as a reminder of the destruction that had occurred. There was no sign of life, but the feeling of danger was palpable. Every shadow seemed to hide something, and every creaking sound made the soldiers tense, ready for whatever might jump out at them. As they neared the center of the city, the energy readings grew stronger, but there was still no sign of the alien creatures who had sent the distress signal. Voss's instincts told him something wasn't right. If there were survivors, they should have been here waiting for help. Instead, the city was eerily silent, almost as if the inhabitants had disappeared. Keep moving, Voss said, his voice tight with impatience. We're close. They pushed forward, navigating through the rubble and debris. The silence was deafening. It was as if the entire planet was holding its breath. No sounds of wildlife, no distant voices, not even the hum of technology. Only the wind whispered through the ruins. Then, just as they were about to reach the heart of the city, the ground trembled. The air around them grew thick, and the faint energy signal surged to an alarming level. Voss's heart raced. Something was happening. We've got company, one of the soldiers muttered, his eyes scanning the horizon. The first explosion shattered the silence, sending debris flying in all directions. Voss barely had time to react before another explosion ripped through the ground, knocking him off his feet. The force of the blast sent shockwaves through the air, and the sky lit up with the glow of fire. Report, Voss barked as he struggled to get back on his feet. He could hear the sounds of gunfire and shouting as his crew scrambled to regroup. The soldiers were taking defensive positions, but Voss knew something had changed. They weren't dealing with mere survivors. They were facing a force that had the power to lay waste to an entire city. Hostiles incoming. Trix shouted, her voice filled with panic. It's not just the aliens. Something else is here. We're not alone. Voss gritted his teeth. The Deathworlder fleet was known for its fearlessness, but even they hadn't prepared for this. Whatever was attacking, it wasn't just an ordinary force. It was something far more advanced, far more dangerous. Fall back, Voss ordered. Get to the landing craft. Now, the soldiers began retreating, firing their weapons at the shadowy figures emerging from the ruins. These weren't the primitive aliens they had expected to find. No, these were something different, something that could move with terrifying speed and power, disappearing into the smoke and rubble before they could get a clear shot. Voss's mind raced as he ran toward the landing craft. His thoughts flashed back to the distress signal they had intercepted. It had been a cry for help. But now, it seemed like it had been a trap, designed to lure them into a situation they couldn't escape from. The explosions kept coming, each one closer than the last. The sky overhead lit up with bursts of light, and the ground shook with the force of another blast. They had to move faster. They had to get out of there. "We can't leave them behind," one of the soldiers shouted, but Voss knew better. The fleet was too valuable to risk losing. They had to regroup, get back to their ships, and prepare for what was coming next. "No one's getting left behind," Voss said through gritted teeth. "But we need to survive first. Get to the ships." The soldiers pushed forward, firing their weapons as they went. The air was filled with the sound of gunfire and explosions, and Voss could see the smoke rising from the city's center. Whatever was attacking, it was relentless. And it wasn't just a small group of enemies. It was something bigger, something far more organized than anything they had faced before. As they neared the landing craft, a figure stepped out from the smoke. It was tall, humanoid, with sleek black armor that reflected the light of the explosions around them. The figure's eyes glowed a deep, unsettling red, and its presence was enough to freeze the soldiers in their tracks. Voss's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a new enemy. This was something far more dangerous. "We're not alone," Voss muttered, his voice barely audible. The enemy had arrived, and it was worse than anything they could have imagined. The face of the enemy. Voss's heart pounded in his chest as the mysterious figure stepped forward from the thick smoke. The air felt heavier with each passing second, and the soldiers instinctively raised their weapons, their fingers tight on the triggers. The figure's eyes glowed with a menacing red hue, casting an eerie light on its black, reflective armor. The enemy was here, and it was not like anything Voss had ever seen. The figure took another step forward, its movements smooth and deliberate. For a moment, there was an almost unnatural calm in the air, as if the entire battlefield had paused, holding its breath. Voss's soldiers exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. But Voss, ever the leader, kept his eyes fixed on the enemy, his mind racing for a solution. "Stay calm," Voss ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Keep your focus. We'll get through this." The figure said nothing. It simply stood there, watching them with those glowing red eyes, as if evaluating their every move. The silence was suffocating, and Voss could hear the distant rumble of more explosions echoing through the city. But this new enemy seemed to have no interest in the chaos. It was focused entirely on them. Without warning, the figure lifted its hand, and a series of mechanical clicks echoed in the air. In a flash, several more of the same figures appeared from the smoke, surrounding Voss and his team. They moved like shadows, blending into the darkness, their movements faster than any human or alien Voss had ever encountered. Trix, the communications officer, was the first to speak. "Commander, they're not responding to our communications. They're not like anything we've ever encountered." Voss's grip on his weapon tightened. "I can see that, Trix. Stay alert, everyone. We don't know what they want, but we're not giving up this position." One of the enemy figures raised a strange device, and with a sharp whine, it emitted a pulse of energy that cut through the air, sending a shockwave across the battlefield. The pulse hit the ground near Voss's feet, causing the earth to tremble violently. His soldiers staggered back, trying to keep their balance. The shockwave was unlike anything Voss had ever felt before. It wasn't just physical force, It was as if the very fabric of reality had been momentarily bent. "We can't fight them like this," one of the soldiers muttered, his voice shaking. "They're too powerful." Voss turned toward the soldier, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll fight however we have to. Fall back to the landing craft. Keep moving. We need to regroup and figure out what these things want." The soldiers began retreating, moving cautiously but quickly toward the safety of the landing craft. The enemy figures did not pursue them, but instead they moved silently, surrounding them at a distance, their red eyes never leaving the Deathworlders. The tension in the air was thick, as if the enemy was toying with them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they reached the landing craft, Voss's mind raced. The enemy had been waiting for them. That much was clear. But why? Were they simply trying to stop the Deathworlders from helping the aliens in distress? Or was there a deeper purpose behind their attack? Voss had no answers, but he knew one thing for sure. The danger wasn't over. If anything, it had only just begun. "Commander, we've made it back to the craft," Trix reported, her voice tense with urgency. "But the damage is severe. I don't know if we'll be able to launch." Voss looked around at his crew. Their situation had gone from bad to worse in a matter of hours. The distress call they had responded to now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a far more immediate threat. "Hold tight," Voss said, turning toward the craft's hatch. "We'll figure this out. First, we need to assess the damage. Then, we'll plan our next move." But just as he stepped toward the hatch, a loud roar echoed through the air, shaking the ground beneath them. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien. It was something far more terrifying. The roar sounded like a creature, something primal, and it was coming closer. The soldiers froze, their eyes wide in fear. What the hell was that? One of them whispered, his voice barely audible. Voss didn't have to answer. The roar grew louder, and then, out of the smoke and shadows, a massive shape emerged, something gigantic, moving with incredible speed and force. It was a creature, unlike anything Voss had seen before. Its body was covered in thick, armored plates, and its glowing eyes burned with an unnatural fury. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. It was a beast, a predator, and it was charging toward them with terrifying speed. "Get inside. Now," Voss screamed, his voice breaking through the panic. "Move." The soldiers scrambled for the hatch of the landing craft, but the beast was too fast. It lunged, its massive claws slashing through the air. A soldier screamed as one of the claws caught him, sending him flying through the air like a ragdoll. Voss was the last to enter the craft, slamming the hatch shut just as the creature's claws scraped against the metal. The force of the impact shook the entire craft, and Voss could feel the heat of the creature's breath through the thick walls. For a moment, the only sound was the heavy breathing of the soldiers inside the craft, their hearts racing with fear. They were safe, for now. But the threat was far from over. The enemy had shown their strength, and now they were about to face something even worse, the terrifying creature that had just attacked. Voss looked at his team, his face hard with resolve. "We're not done yet. Prepare for a fight." The beast unleashed. Inside the cramped interior of the landing craft, the crew was silent. The last few moments had been a blur of chaos, screams, the roar of the creature, and the deafening sound of claws scraping across metal. Voss gripped the controls with white knuckles, his heart pounding in his chest. They had barely escaped the attack, but they weren't out of danger yet. The creature was still out there, waiting for its next chance to strike. Is everyone accounted for? Voss's voice was steady, but his mind raced with questions. He glanced over at Trix, who was working furiously at the communications panel, trying to get the ship's systems online. "We got everyone inside, Commander," she replied, her voice tense. "But we're barely holding together. The damage is extensive. If we don't get this craft back to full power, we won't be able to escape." Voss turned to his crew. They were shaken, their faces pale, but none of them had lost their resolve. These soldiers were Deathworlders, battle-hardened, fierce, and ready for anything. But even they were struggling to process the scale of the threat they were facing. The creature, Voss. It's unlike anything we've ever seen, one of the soldiers muttered. His voice was low, filled with awe and fear. It's massive, too fast, too powerful. How are we supposed to fight something like that? Voss clenched his fists, his gaze fixed on the glowing redouts in front of him. He knew the enemy was not just the creature. There were others, too, more of those shadowy figures with red eyes, the ones that had surrounded them earlier. They were just waiting for the right moment to strike again. We can't fight it head-on, Voss said, his voice firm. We need to think strategically. We'll use the ship's weapons to hold it off long enough to make a getaway. We can't afford to stay here and fight. We need to warn the fleet. We need reinforcements. The soldiers nodded in agreement, though some looked more uncertain than others. They were used to fighting dangerous enemies. But this was different. This was a new level of terror, and they had no idea what else the enemy had in store. Trix was still focused on the panel, her hands flying over the controls. Commander, I'm trying to restore communications. I've got a weak signal, but I can't guarantee it'll hold. Voss nodded. Do what you can. We need to reach the fleet now. The sound of claws scraping against the outside of the craft made everyone jump. Voss's heart skipped a beat. The creature was circling them, waiting. It wasn't just hunting for food, it was hunting for sport. Suddenly, Trix's voice broke through the tension. I've got a signal, she exclaimed. It's weak, but it's coming through. Commander, I'm sending out a distress call. The fleet needs to know what we're up against. Voss turned his attention to the screen as the call went out. His heart raced as he hoped the fleet would receive it in time. But before he could get a response, a loud crash shook the craft. The hull groaned as the creature slammed into it again, sending shockwaves through the ship. Get to the guns, Voss shouted, his voice barely above the roar of the impact. Prepare to fire. The soldiers scrambled to their positions, their movements quick and precise despite the chaos. They knew what was coming. The creature was trying to break through, to tear apart the only thing standing between it and its prey. Voss grabbed the nearest weapon, a high-powered plasma rifle, and aimed it toward the hatch. He could see the beast's enormous shadow through the thin metal walls. It was circling again, preparing for another strike. The air was thick with tension, and the whole crew was on edge, waiting for the next attack. Without warning, the creature charged. Its claws slammed into the ship with terrifying force, shaking the entire craft. Voss's ears rang with the impact as the soldiers fired their weapons in unison. Plasma blasts lit up the interior of the ship, but the creature didn't flinch. It didn't slow down. Hit it with everything we've got, Voss commanded, his voice firm, but there was a hint of desperation. Don't hold back. The weapons fired, but the creature seemed almost impervious to the plasma blasts. It roared again, sending a shockwave through the hull. The ship groaned and buckled under the pressure. Voss could feel the craft shaking, and he knew they didn't have much time. We can't keep this up much longer, one of the soldiers shouted, panic creeping into his voice. We don't need to, Voss said, his mind racing. Trix, is the distress signal ready? Almost there, she replied, her voice strained. Just a few more seconds. Voss didn't wait. He grabbed the comms panel, switching to a direct line to the fleet. This is Commander Voss of the Deathworlder fleet, he said, his voice steady. We've encountered a new enemy, massive creatures, fast, powerful. We're under attack, and we need immediate support. There was a brief pause, then the voice on the other end responded. Commander Voss, we're receiving your signal. Hold tight. We're sending reinforcements. Voss breathed a sigh of relief, but the danger wasn't over. The creature outside was still relentless, slamming its massive body against the ship with terrifying strength. The ground beneath them shook again, and the entire craft jolted violently. We need to get out of here now, Voss yelled. The ship's engines roared to life as Trix managed to restore enough power to make a desperate escape. The craft lurched forward, just as the creature slammed into it one final time, nearly ripping the ship in two. But Voss and his crew managed to break free, darting into the sky as the creature's roar echoed behind them. As they soared through the atmosphere, Voss glanced back at the planet below. The battle wasn't over. The fleet was coming, but would it be enough? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. They had survived for now, and with the fleet's help, they would return to finish the fight. The fleet arrives. The stars streaked past as Voss's ship hurtled through the void of space, its hull groaning with each violent shake. The engines were barely holding together after the last attack, and the crew's nerves were stretched thin. The creature's assault had left them on edge. But now, as they raced toward the fleet, a new hope flickered. Reinforcements were coming. "Hold tight, everyone." Voss called out, his voice steady but urgent. "We're almost there. The fleet is just ahead." Inside the ship, the crew worked in silence. Trix was hunched over the communication console, her fingers moving rapidly over the keys as she tried to keep the line open with the fleet. Her eyes were bloodshot from hours of non-stop work, but there was a look of determination on her face. "We've made it," Trix said, her voice filled with relief. "The fleet's responding, Commander. We're not alone anymore." Voss allowed himself a brief smile before the tension returned. "Good. Let's make sure they're ready. This fight isn't over yet." Outside, the void of space stretched endlessly, but in the distance, Voss could see the outlines of the Deathworlder fleet. It was an imposing sight. Thousands of ships, massive and powerful, all bristling with weapons. The fleet was formidable, a perfect match for any threat. But as Voss's eyes scanned the horizon, a wave of unease washed over him. He knew that even the fleet might not be enough to stop the enemy they had encountered. "What are we walking into, Commander?" one of the soldiers asked, his voice tense. "That thing we fought. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before." Voss glanced back at the soldier, his expression grim. "We don't know what we're facing yet, but we'll be ready for whatever comes." The ship shook again, a reminder that the creature was still out there. Voss quickly returned his focus to the front, his mind calculating the possibilities. The fleet would arrive soon, but would it be enough? The Deathworlders were known for their ferocity in battle, but this enemy was different. The creature they had encountered, as well as the mysterious figures, were unlike any foe the fleet had faced before. "Commander," Trix said suddenly, her voice sharp with alarm. "We're not alone anymore." Voss's heart skipped a beat. He turned sharply toward her, his instincts immediately on edge. "What do you mean, not alone?" Trix pointed to the screen, her hand trembling slightly. There on the edge of their sensors was a massive fleet of enemy ships, unlike anything the Deathworlders had ever encountered. These ships were sleek, angular, and dark, almost as if they blended into the shadows of space. Their weapons were visible, pulsing with ominous energy. The shapes were foreign, designed for speed and aggression. "They're closing in fast," Trix continued, her voice a mixture of disbelief and fear. "It's an entire fleet of them." Voss's mind raced. This was no longer just a fight against one creature. They were facing an entire armada of enemies, an unknown force with the power to destroy the Deathworlder fleet. The creature they had fought was only a small part of the greater threat that was now bearing down on them. "We need to warn the fleet," Voss said, his voice calm but urgent. "Get in touch with the command ship. Tell them we need backup, and we need it now." As Trix worked to send the message, Voss's thoughts were a whirlwind of strategies and plans. He knew they were outmatched. The fleet was strong, but this enemy had a size and speed advantage, and with the creature still lurking somewhere, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping up his spine. But then, as the Deathworlder fleet loomed closer, Voss felt a spark of hope. They were fighters, born for this. The fleet had faced impossible odds before, and they would do it again. They just needed to stay alive long enough for backup to arrive. "Reinforcements are coming," Voss said, trying to reassure himself as much as his crew. "Hold on a little longer. We'll survive this. We have to." Trix gave a sharp nod, her face grim but resolute. "We're ready for this, Commander. We've trained our whole lives for a battle like this." Outside, the enemy fleet closed in even faster. The stars seemed to blur as the ships hurtled toward each other, the vastness of space shrinking in the face of what was about to unfold. The Deathworlder fleet, despite its size and strength, would have to rely on every last bit of their cunning, strength, and willpower to survive this battle. And somewhere out in the darkness, the creature roared, its call echoing through the void. It was only a matter of time before the Deathworlder fleet would be engaged in the fight of their lives. The battle begins. The first shots were fired with the suddenness of a storm breaking. A wave of intense energy lit up the dark void of space as the Deathworlder fleet clashed with the alien invaders. The air was thick with tension, the hum of engines, and the crackle of weapons fire reverberating in the ship's corridors. Voss stood at the command center, gripping the edge of his seat as the battle unfolded before him. On the view screen, the enemy fleet was like a black wave crashing against the Deathworlder armada. Their sleek, dark ships darted and weaved with a terrifying speed, each one appearing to be an extension of the darkness itself. They were coordinated, almost like a single entity, an organized swarm that seemed to anticipate every move the Deathworlders made. "We're outnumbered, Commander." Trix's voice came through sharply, cutting through the chaos. "They're moving too fast. We can't lock onto them with our weapons." Voss didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the view screen, watching the enemy ships dance and dodge, almost as if they were alive. The Deathworlders were accustomed to battle, but this was different. The enemy fleet seemed to possess a strange, almost unnatural grace, an elegance that made them more difficult to track. "We'll adjust," Voss finally said, his voice low but determined. "Send a signal to the fleet. Tell them to use manual targeting. We'll have to rely on our instincts." He could see the fleet responding, ships breaking formation to engage the enemy on their own terms. But the alien ships were relentless, hammering away with precise, deadly blasts that tore through the Deathworlder ship's shields. The explosions lit up space like distant stars going nova, sending plumes of debris drifting into the void. Voss's heart pounded in his chest. He had been in countless battles before, but never against an enemy like this. Their tactics were unlike anything the Deathworlders had ever encountered. It wasn't just firepower they had to worry about. It was the unpredictability, the seeming omniscience of their movements. But just as Voss feared they might be overwhelmed, a new signal crackled through the comm system, interrupting the chaos. "Commander," Trix said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "The reinforcements are here. The fleet just arrived." Voss's eyes snapped to the view screen as a new fleet emerged from the depths of space, joining the fray. It wasn't just one ship or even a handful. It was an entire battalion of Deathworlder ships, each one more powerful than the last. The reinforcements were more than just a boost to their numbers. They were the deciding factor in this war. The tide of battle shifted almost instantly. The new fleet, coordinated and battle-hardened, was ready to strike. They opened fire, their weapons unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that struck the alien ships with unrelenting force. The enemy fleet, though fast and evasive, could not withstand the onslaught. Ships exploded in a flurry of fire and debris, their engines ruptured and their hulls torn apart. "We're pushing them back," shouted one of Voss's officers, a grin of fierce triumph spreading across his face. "They're retreating." For a moment, it seemed as though the tide had truly turned. The Deathworlder fleet, now bolstered by reinforcements, began to chase the remaining alien ships, driving them deeper into space. Voss allowed himself a brief moment of relief as he watched the enemy retreating in disarray. But his victory was short-lived. As the enemy ships pulled back, Voss noticed something strange. They weren't just retreating. They were regrouping. The black ships seemed to coalesce into a single formation, almost as if they were preparing for a second wave. It was as if they were waiting, as if they were biding their time. And at the center of this regrouping force, Voss saw a massive ship, far larger and more menacing than the rest. The ship was a shadow in space, cloaked in an almost unnatural blackness that absorbed the light around it. It was an intimidating sight, and as it moved forward, the rest of the fleet followed in perfect synchrony. "Commander, we have a problem." Trix's voice came through, quiet but tense. "That ship, it's unlike anything we've seen before. It's emitting a strange energy signature, one we've never detected." Voss's heart sank as he watched the massive ship moving into position. He could feel it in his gut. This was the real threat. The alien forces had been testing them, wearing them down, and now they were preparing for their final assault. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Voss clenched his fists, his mind racing with the possibilities. The fleet was strong, but this new enemy was something different. Something dangerous, something that could destroy them all. "Prepare for the worst," Voss said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of what was to come. "We need everything we've got. This is it. This is the final fight." The battle for survival had only just begun, and as the enemy's new ship loomed closer, Voss knew there would be no turning back. The fate of the Deathworlder fleet, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. The final showdown. The vast emptiness of space echoed with the roar of battle. The Deathworlder fleet was battered, their ships scared from the brutal fighting, but they were not yet defeated. In the distance, the massive alien flagship loomed like a dark omen, its presence casting a shadow over the battlefield. The enemy fleet, now reformed and unified under the shadow of the flagship, began to advance once more. Voss stood in the command center, his knuckles white as they gripped the edge of his console. His heart raced in anticipation. The Deathworlders had fought with everything they had, but this new alien ship, this warship of immense size and power, was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was a beast, its energy shields flickering with a strange purple glow, its weapons primed and ready for the final assault. Trix, her face pale but determined, turned to him. "Commander, we've got one shot at this. We've seen the way they move. If we hit them at the right moment, we might have a chance to take down their flagship." Voss nodded grimly. The tension in the air was suffocating. The Deathworlder fleet had already sustained heavy losses, and the reinforcements they'd received earlier were now spread thin, trying to hold their ground against the relentless alien assault. The fate of their entire species was on the line. "Prepare to engage the flagship," Voss ordered, his voice firm, though his mind raced with doubt. If they failed here, the Deathworlders would be annihilated. There would be no retreat, no surrender, only survival or total destruction. The fleet moved into formation, their weapons primed and ready. But the alien flagship, slow, massive, and ominous, moved with an unnerving calm. It seemed to know what was coming. Its weapons began to charge, crackling with an eerie energy that sent shivers down Voss's spine. "Target their weapons systems," Voss instructed. "We need to disable their firepower before we can take them down." The fleet opened fire, a storm of energy blasts rocketing toward the alien ship. But the flagship's shields absorbed the hits with ease, sending the energy harmlessly into space. The Deathworlder's weapons were powerful, but they were no match for the flagship's advanced technology. The Deathworlder ships weaved in and out, dodging fire as they attempted to find weak spots in the alien flagship's defenses. But no matter what angle they approached from, the alien ship's shields and weapons seemed to anticipate their every move. It was like fighting an immovable force, a juggernaut that would not be stopped. Suddenly, a massive blast ripped through space. Voss's heart skipped a beat as one of the Deathworlder ships, the Talon of Fury, was struck dead center by a beam of concentrated energy. The ship exploded in a burst of light, sending debris scattering in all directions. The sound of the explosion seemed to ripple across space, a silent scream in the void. "Casualty report," Voss barked, his eyes narrowing in anger. "Talon of Fury is gone, Commander," came the grim response from his officer. "We're losing ships at an alarming rate." Voss clenched his fists in fury. He had known this would be a hard fight. But this was more than he had prepared for. The Deathworlders were warriors, but these aliens, this fleet, were not just enemies. They were a force of nature, and they would stop at nothing to destroy them. But in the midst of the chaos, something changed. Voss's eyes caught a faint signal on his console, an incoming transmission from the Talon of Fury. It was a distress signal, barely decipherable through the static, but he could hear the voice on the other end. It was desperate. "This is Commander Kier of the Talon of Fury. We've located a weakness, a way to break their shields." Voss's heart pounded in his chest. This was their chance. "Patch me through," Voss shouted, leaning forward in his chair. The screen flickered for a moment before stabilizing. Commander Kier's face appeared on the screen, his expression strained but determined. "Commander Voss," Kier said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "We've discovered that the flagship's energy core is vulnerable. It's located deep within the ship, near the central command hub. If we can hit it with a concentrated burst of energy, it'll disrupt their shields long enough for us to land a killing blow." Voss didn't hesitate. "I'll send my best ships to assist you, Commander. Get that shot in. We end this now." With the new strategy in place, the Deathworlder fleet shifted into a new formation. They would focus all their firepower on the flagship's weak spot. This was their final chance. Voss watched as the fleet adjusted, the ships coming together in a cohesive, synchronized move that only Deathworlders could achieve. It was a deadly dance, one that required precision and the utmost trust between each ship and its crew. They were moving in to strike their final blow. The enemy flagship responded immediately, unleashing a barrage of fire that could wipe out entire fleets in seconds. But the Deathworlders held their ground, pushing forward despite the hail of incoming fire. They had only one objective: the energy core. Then, with a roar of engines, the fleet closed in on the flagship. A beam of concentrated energy shot out from the lead ship, striking the alien flagship's core with terrifying precision. The energy shields around the flagship flickered, then faltered, and for a brief moment, just a fleeting instant, the ship was vulnerable. That was all they needed. Every remaining Deathworlder ship unleashed everything they had, firing on the exposed core with every weapon they had left. Energy blasts collided with the flagship's now weakened core, and in an explosion of light and sound, the flagship's energy core detonated. The resulting blast rocked the battlefield, sending shockwaves across space. The alien fleet began to disband, retreating in disarray as their flagship was obliterated in a fiery explosion. The Deathworlder fleet, though battered, emerged victorious. The war was over. The Deathworlders had triumphed. Voss stood at the command center, breathing heavily, but with a look of grim satisfaction on his face. His fleet had survived the impossible, had faced a threat beyond comprehension, and had come out victorious. "Victory is ours," Voss said quietly. The war had ended, but the echoes of it would live on forever. And as the fleet sailed through the stars, they knew one thing for certain: the galaxy was safe, for now.